You wake up. It's 40,000 years ago. You open your eyes, and the first thing you notice is that you can't see anything. Not because it's dark, because your hair has completely taken over your face. It's hanging over your eyes, tangled around your ears, and your beard has grown so long it's getting caught in the animal skin you're sleeping on. You have a hunt in 1 hour, and 0 salons within a 40,000-year radius. So, what do? This sounds like a joke, but this was a real daily problem for prehistoric humans, and the way they solved it, genuinely more fascinating and more extreme than anything your barber has ever done. Because somewhere between being covered in uncontrollable wild hair and looking like a functioning human being, our ancestors figured something out. And the answer involves volcanic glass, open fire, and what might be the sharpest object ever created in the history of the world. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll never complain about a bad haircut again. Let's start with the real problem, not the inconvenience, the actual life or death danger. Most people assume ancient humans just let their hair grow, like some kind of permanent caveman afro situation. They were too busy surviving to worry about grooming, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. Because here's the thing nobody tells you in history class. Leaving your hair completely wild in prehistoric times didn't just make you look bad. It could actually get you killed. Picture this. You're a prehistoric hunter. You're crouched in tall grass, completely still, watching a deer about 30 meters away. You slowly raise your spear. You aim, and then a giant curtain of greasy, overgrown hair swings directly across your eyes. You flinch. The deer hears you. It runs. Your entire tribe goes hungry tonight. That's problem number 1. But this wasn't even the biggest problem. See, ancient humans weren't just hunting animals, they were also fighting each other. Rival tribes, territorial disputes, competition over food and resources, close combat was a real thing. And in a wrestling match or a brawl, long uncontrolled hair is basically handing your enemy a free handle. Grab someone by the hair, pull them down, fight over. That's your prehistoric tactical disadvantage right there, growing out of your own head. But wait. It gets worse, because the real silent killer hiding in all that unmanaged hair? Insects, specifically lice. Prehistoric lice weren't just annoying, they were vectors for dangerous bacteria, infections, and disease. The longer and thicker the hair, the more perfect the environment for these parasites to multiply. Scientists have found ancient lice combs going back thousands of years, which tells us something important. Ancient humans were not casually ignoring this problem. They were actively, obsessively fighting it. So grooming wasn't vanity, it was survival strategy. The question is, how did they actually do it? Here's where it gets genuinely surprising. When most people imagine a prehistoric human trying to cut hair, they picture something rough, jagged rocks, clumsy sawing motions, a screaming caveman yanking clumps out by force, and honestly, that image is kind of hilarious, but it's also completely wrong. The real answer involves a material so sharp, so precise, that modern scientists actually had to create new words to describe its cutting ability. That material is obsidian. Obsidian is volcanic glass. It forms when lava cools so rapidly that it solidifies before crystals can even begin to grow. And when you strike it correctly, when you know exactly where to hit it and at what angle, it shatters into edges that are, and this is not an exaggeration, thinner than a single molecule of protein. Modern surgical scalpels have edges about 300 nanometers thick. A freshly napped obsidian blade? 30 nanometers. That's literally 10 times sharper than the finest surgical steel used in hospitals today. Ancient humans were walking around with something more precise than a surgeon's scalpel, made from cooled lava, that they shaped with their bare hands. Think about that the next time you complain about a razor giving you a slightly rough shave. And it wasn't just obsidian. Flint was also widely used, another stone that, when struck at the right angle, produces a cutting edge so fine you can barely see it. Archaeologists have found these tools all over the world, in caves in France, in ancient campsites in Africa, in prehistoric dwellings across Asia. These weren't accidental. Humans were deliberately crafting precision-cutting instruments, tens of thousands of years before anyone thought to put metal in a handle. But here's the counterintuitive part. The skill wasn't just in the cutting, it was in the napping, the process of shaping the stone. Not everyone could do it well, which means that even in prehistoric times, there was probably someone in the group who was just better at this. The person everyone went to when they needed a trim. The world's first barber, squatting by a fire, holding a piece of volcanic glass, running what was essentially the most dangerous beauty salon in human history. Now, here's where things get even stranger. Not every ancient culture used stone tools for hair management. Some of them used something else entirely. Something you would never in a million years guess was a grooming technique: fire. Some prehistoric groups, and this is documented in anthropological studies of isolated ancient communities, would use smoldering sticks to singe the ends of hair. Not to burn it all off, to control the length. They would take a glowing wooden stick, bring it carefully toward the ends of the hair, let the heat do the cutting, and then immediately stop it with water, or just pull it away. The result? A kind of heat-trimmed edge. Rough by modern standards, but functionally effective at managing length, without any blade at all. Is this terrifying? Absolutely. Is it genius? Also absolutely. And before you think this sounds too extreme to be real, consider this. Variations of heat-based hair shaping were still documented in rural communities well into the 20th century. This wasn't some bizarre one-time experiment. It was a legit technique, refined over generations, that worked well enough that people kept doing it for thousands of years. The real reason this surprises most people is because we've been taught to imagine ancient humans as fundamentally incompetent, like they were just stumbling around, barely conscious, reacting to things. But the evidence keeps pointing in the opposite direction. These people were innovative, systematic. They looked at a problem, unmanageable hair, and found multiple solutions using entirely different approaches, then passed those solutions down through generations. But here's the question that really changes everything. How do we actually know any of this? Because this is the part that most people, even people who love history, have never heard, and it's the part that genuinely blew the minds of the scientists who discovered it. In the last few decades, researchers studying ancient mummies and prehistoric remains started doing something new. Instead of just looking at bones and tools, they started examining hair under high-powered electron microscopes. And what they found was extraordinary. The tips of the hair strands, on mummies thousands of years old, showed clean, micro-precise cut marks. Not ragged breakage, not fraying from neglect. Actual cut marks. The kind that could only be produced by a sharp implement applied deliberately, at a specific angle, with controlled force. These findings, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science, essentially proved something that changed how we understand prehistoric humans entirely. These people were not wild. They were not randomly unkempt. They were actively, intentionally grooming themselves with a level of precision that left microscopic evidence on hair strands that survived for millennia. Scientists could tell the difference between hair that had been cut with obsidian, flint, or even a shell-based blade, just from the microscopic signature of the cut. Each material leaves a slightly different pattern at the cellular level of the hair shaft. It's like forensic detective work, but for ancient barbershops. And here's the insight that really puts it all together. This wasn't reserved for the elite. This wasn't a luxury behavior. The evidence shows grooming tools and cut hair patterns across all kinds of prehistoric sites. Small camps, large settlements, high-status burials, everyday graves. This was universal human behavior. Every culture, every region, every time period where we have enough evidence to look, humans were cutting their hair. We didn't become a grooming species when civilization appeared. We were always a grooming species. It's baked into us at a level that predates farming, language, cities, or written history. So let's talk about what modern people actually get wrong about this. The biggest misconception is the caveman image itself, the dragging knuckles, grunting, permanently disheveled prehistoric human. That image is almost entirely a cultural invention. It became popular in the 19th century when early scientists made a lot of assumptions about ancient humans that later turned out to be completely wrong. They looked at the tools, the lack of written records, the simple shelters, and concluded that these people must have been mentally and socially primitive. But primitive tools don't mean primitive minds. An obsidian blade is primitive only if you ignore the fact that it outperforms modern surgical steel. A fire-singeing technique is primitive only if you ignore that it required knowledge, practice, and precision to avoid, setting someone's head on fire. The people who invented these grooming techniques were cognitively identical to us. Same brains, same problem-solving capacity, same social structures that created pressure to look presentable, to maintain hygiene, to signal group membership through personal appearance. They just had different materials to work with. And honestly, given the materials available, what they came up with is remarkable. So here's the big takeaway, and it's one of those ideas that, once you hear it, quietly reorganizes how you think about human history. Every generation of humans has looked at the same basic problems. How do I survive? How do I communicate? How do I look presentable to the people around me? And solve them using whatever was available. The solutions look completely different across time, but the underlying drive, identical. We are a species that has always cared about how we present ourselves, not because we're vain, because we're social. Because appearance is communication. Because grooming is a signal of health, capability, and belonging that goes back further than any civilization we've ever built. Your prehistoric ancestor, sitting by a fire 40,000 years ago, carefully running a piece of volcanic glass along the edge of their hair. They weren't doing something primitive. They were doing something deeply, recognizably human. The next time you're in a barber's chair, looking at yourself in the mirror, maybe complaining that one side is just slightly shorter than the other, take a second. Because somewhere in your deep ancestral memory is the experience of sitting very still while someone held a glowing stick near your head, or pressed the edge of a freshly shattered rock against your neck, and trusted that the person holding it had done this enough times to know what they were doing. We've come a long way, but we haven't changed as much as we think. And maybe that's the most surprising cut of all.